Sir Stephen Timms for the Work and Pensions Committee.
Thank you. Mr. You will have seen the report from the Trussell Trust that food bank demand in April to September this year was 16% higher than in the same period last year. You said when you came to the committee first time a year ago that you hoped that by the time of the election food bank demand would be falling. Do you think that's likely to be the case?
I haven't seen that report, and so I can't comment on it specifically. Of course, I want food bank usage, as I've consistently said. You would prefer for people not to have to use food banks, but as I've said previously as well, I'm grateful to all those people who are involved in providing them because they provide support to people. What we can do is to continue to lift people out of poverty, improve their incomes, and then support families with food costs as we do through things like the holiday activity.
I'm wondering
and food
specifically
programme.
whether the hope you expressed a year ago that food bank demand would be going down by the time of the election, whether you think that's likely to be achieved.
And what we've had, I think, probably since then is the significant inflation in the economy, which has impacted food prices as it has done other things, which will obviously make it more challenging. But look, I'm generally confident that the policies that we are putting in place are making a difference to help the most vulnerable. That goes to national living wage increase, the support for the cost of living this year, the increase in the local housing allowance. All of these are things that particularly help the incomes of the lowest paid and those on welfare, and that will help, I hope, over time, reduce food bank usage.
Okay, thank you. I very much welcome the rebasing of the local housing allowance, as you've said, from April to the 30th percentile. The last time that happened was when you were the Chancellor at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, when it was rebased at the 30th percentile. In the 4 years from April 2020 until April next year, it's been frozen. And in that period, rents have risen quite a lot. So I think it's clear what's happened is people have had to dig into their other income, their other benefit income, in order to pay the rent because the housing support hasn't increased. I wonder whether you recognise that has been one of the major drivers of increased food bank demand over this 4-year period.
I think it's probably hard to reduce food bank demand, as we know, is there are lots of complex reasons people are in food banks, to one single factor. I think more generally, at a time when inflation, when I took this job, is running at 11%, clearly that's going to have an impact on household finances, and that will manifest itself in lots of different ways. What is important for me to do and the government to do is to make sure that we are targeting policy and support on those who most need it. The local housing allowance is a particularly good way of helping families. It's targeted on those on the lowest incomes, particularly those with children. It will provide around £800 to those who benefit
I agree
from
with that. Isn't there a very strong case for annual uprating of the local housing allowance, not having, as we have had, an increase and then a 4-year freeze and then another increase?
Look, I think there's lots of different ways government can do this, and there are lots of different competing demands on government's resources, ultimately their taxpayer resources. What government has done is uprate welfare going into this next year fully, which will be at twice the rate, or around twice the forecast rate of inflation. Right, so that is a significant uprating going into next year, well ahead of what forecast inflation is going to be. And again, people speculated about that, so the government has honoured that uprating in full. I said twice the rate of inflation, as well as this significant increase in the LHA. I think taken together, and the national living wage increase, these are all significant things that will help those on the lowest income.
Can I simply ask you to look specific at LHA? Because I think there is a very strong case for keeping it uprated rather than the 4-year freeze that we've had. At the start of the pandemic, you introduced the Household Support Fund, which has enabled local councils to provide a sort of last resort safety net for families with nowhere else to turn. We don't know at the moment whether that's going to be extended into the next financial year. I wonder whether you'd accept that there is a very strong case for extending it so that that very important safety net remains in place into the new financial year.
It wouldn't be right for me to comment on future fiscal events. I think that was introduced during an exceptional period. It was introduced during the pandemic and then extended during the significant spike in energy bills. So it's important to remember the context has not historically been a permanent feature of the welfare system. And what we have done going into next year, as I said earlier, was increase all welfare payments by the full 6.7%, I think it is, in spite of forecast inflation next year being less than half of that.
Yeah.
Now, that provides significant extra support to
I mean,
people.
that works both ways, of course. At the times, the increase in benefits has been much less than the current rate of inflation. But you're right, you've stuck with a consistent formula. That's the right thing to do. I don't think it reflects particular credit on the government, but it's...
No, but I think it's rare that you have such a mismatch. And that's where...
Well, there was a bigger mismatch the other way round a couple of years ago.
Since I was Chancellor, we've consistently uprated welfare, and inflation has tended to, as I said, come in low, other than this past year when it's been higher, when we provided extra specific bespoke support. But what we do know now, again, things can change, going into next year, welfare will be uprated at twice the forecast rate of inflation. So that's just, whatever happened in the past is the past. From where we are today, next year, the change in people's welfare will be higher than the forecast change in inflation by quite a considerable margin. And I think it is worth that, together with the LHA increase, are quite significant amounts of extra support to those on the lowest incomes, rightly, because inflation is still higher than we would like it and things are difficult. So it's the right thing to do to focus on that, but I think it's worth just appreciating that those two things together are quite significant support.
Okay.